Hello, my wonderful psychology students. Good to have you back again for this research method session. Our focus area will be that of inferential statistics. So let's get started. Now, a little bit of a recap. Think back to some previous learning. Quick question, what is the level of significance in psychology? Come on, think, get into those minds of yours, think deep. Have you all got it? Shout it out to the screen. Yes, fantastic. It is P equals 0.05, or you could say 5%. And what does that mean? We need to be 95% correct and only allow for 5% chance. In real terms, what does that mean? If we've done a study and we've replicated it 20 times, it means that 19 of those replication have to be the same, and we allow for one that's going to be different. And that means we are within the level of significance because we are 95% correct and we've only allowed for 5% chance with regards to it. Now, I have mentioned this too before. There are times when we make our level of significance a little bit more stringent, and usually this drops down to 1%. Remember, 1% is P equals 0.01. That's 1%. And it is really important that you remember these because there has been the odd exam question that has come up with this. One reason why when we'll use a really stringent level of significance is when we only have one chance to do the research. So this phenomenon that we're trying to measure is very rare. It doesn't occur very often. So therefore, we want to eliminate as much chance as possible and get as much accurate data as possible. There's no chance of replication. So that's our first reason. Our second reason is it could be rather life-threatening. We're moving on to drug trials, and yes, maybe we're going to replicate it many times, but it's a matter of life and death. We do not want our drugs to kill our participants, and that's not a good thing. So we want to make our level of significance really stringent then, so that we're near as possible to 99% correct, and we only allow for 1% chance. So really that will minimize the amount of deaths that we may have in a drug trial. So these are the two key reasons that you need to know why our level of significance may become extremely stringent. But let's move on. We're going to focus on the idea of a type 1 error. Now, we've got a type 1 error and a type 2 error, and these are associated to our levels of significance. Type 1 errors, type 1 errors are the equivalent to false positive as the level of significance is set to lenient. Okay, let's deconstruct that sentence. Type 1 errors are the equivalent of a false positive. What do we mean by false positive? That means we're accepting the positive when we shouldn't be. It's false. So really, if we've got our alternative hypothesis and our null hypothesis, that means we are accepting our alternative hypothesis. Meanwhile, we should be rejecting that. So it's a false positive because the level of significance is set to lenient. What we mean by too lenient, it is too high. It's above the 5%. So this means the level of significance is set too high. So it could be like a 10%, 6%, 20%, 15%, 7%. It's too high. And you report that your findings are significant when in fact they've occurred by chance. You've actually said, yes, we've proved our hypothesis, but no, actually you should be accepting your null hypothesis because you didn't. So we get a type 1 error. Type 1 error, level of significance is too high. And just like I've been saying, this error causes the rejection of the null hypothesis when it is actually true. And that's why it comes up with a false positive. We're accepting our alternative hypothesis, and that means we've actually proved what we set out to prove. Meanwhile, we should have accepted our null. Type 1, level of significance is too lenient, too high. A type 2 error comes about, and these are referred to as false negatives. And the reason why we get this false negative as a level of significance is too stringent. That means the level of significance is too tight. We're not giving enough room for error. And that means, so rather than sitting at 5%, we may put it down to 1%. And the research concludes that it's not a significant effect when it actually there was. So this means we accept our null and reject our alternative. Meanwhile, we should be accepting our alternative hypothesis and rejecting our null. So quick recap of a type 2 error. The level of significance is set too stringent, too tight, it's too small. We're not allowing enough chance for error. So for example, 1%, 2%, 3%, we're not allowing enough room for error. And that means we make the wrong conclusion. We make a false negative. We say we didn't prove what we set out to prove, and therefore we accept our null and reject our alternative. Meanwhile, if it was set at 5%, we most probably would have accepted our alternative and rejected our null. So it's really important that you understand the difference between a type 1 and a type 2 error. These occur due to the level of significance. Now, avoiding errors. Now, one of the things, it is very difficult to eradicate a type 1 or a type 2 error, because if we set it too lenient, we're automatically going to get a type 1. If we set it too stringent, we're automatically going to get a type 2. But actually, if we set it at 5%, so 95% correct and 5% error, we know that there is still a chance for a type 1 or type 2 error to occur. We can't eliminate them. And that's what we've got to be really aware of. Type 1 and type 2 errors are part of the process of hypothesis testing. Although the errors cannot be completely eliminated, we can minimize one type of error. So that means we can minimize one type of error. And that's why psychologists agree on the 5%. They favor the 5% level of significance as it best balances the risk of making a type 1 or a type 2 error. So it's all about this risk management. So that 5% allows for better risk management. Typically, when we try to decrease the probability of one type of error, the probability of the other occurring. So if we decide, let's, 10% is too high, so let's make it lower. So we make it more stringent, that increases the chance of a type 1. If we think to ourselves, 2% is too stringent, and we start to increase it, then that leads us open, right, to that of a type 1 error. So there's always going to be, but psychologists believe that that 5% is the happy medium. We would decrease the value of P from 0.05 to 0.01, corresponding to 90% level of significant and allowing for 1% chance of a type 1 error, decreasing the chance of a type 1 as P becomes more stringent. But what happens then? Doesn't that increase the chance of a type 2 error of coming? However, if we increase the value of P, then the probability of a type 1 error will nearly always increase. So we can't eradicate, we can't avoid these errors, but we've got to be totally aware and choose the level that is of most important. And that's why in psychology, actually a majority of the science go that they will allow that 5% error, meaning we have to be 95% correct and we only allow for that 9% chance. Not a big area that you need to know in this section, but get your head around it. Watch this a few times, make notes, refer to the textbook, that will help you as well to understand the difference of a type 1 and a type 2, when they will occur and how do we avoid them. Happy research methods!